Time, that elusive wisp slipping between the cracks of consciousness, stretching and compressing like some cosmic accordion, never quite graspable, yet always present, ticking, 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 sometimes too fast, like sand through frantic fingers, sometimes too slow, an unbearable molasses dragging the moments into eternity. But what is eternity anyway, if not a construct of perception, a shadow of time itself curling back on itself like a serpent devouring its own tail, the Ouroboros, the infinite loop, the paradox of being and becoming. For in every passing second, we are both who we were and who we are yet to be. But does time even move in one direction? Or are we merely passengers on a ride we call linearity, because our minds can't comprehend the simultaneity of all things? The now, the then, the never, the forever, entangled like quantum threads in some universal loom, where past and future are but illusions dancing in the wake of consciousness. And yet, we build our lives around this illusion, setting clocks, counting days, marking anniversaries, mourning the past and fearing the future, all while the present moment evaporates like mist in the morning sun, leaving behind only memories, those echoes of what once was but no longer is. And yet, even memories shift, morph, evolve. So was the past ever truly real? Or is it merely a story we tell ourselves to make sense of a reality that slips through our grasp even as we live it? And in the end, is time anything more than a dream from which we are all waiting to wake up? Time, that fickle illusion, the ever-spinning wheel upon which our existence is tethered, spiraling endlessly through the abyss of perception, stretching, warping, looping upon itself in ways we barely understand. What is a second? A minute? An hour? But an arbitrary slice of something vaster, something immeasurable, something that mocks our attempts to define it with ticking hands and numbered calendars, as if we could ever truly hold it still. But no, time does not wait. Time does not stop. It does not bend to our will, though we try. Oh, how we try. Slowing it down with boredom, speeding it up with joy, shattering it in moments of trauma, letting it slip away in dreams where days and years collapse into a single heartbeat, a breath, a fleeting instant that feels like forever. And yet, even our forevers are temporary, fading into the void of what once was and will never be again, except perhaps in memory. But memories too are unreliable, shifting like sand dunes in the desert of our minds, reshaping themselves, rewriting history in whispers and echoes until we no longer know what truly happened, only what we think happened, or what we wish had happened. And so time plays its tricks, winding back, skipping forward, making fools of us all. For we are its prisoners, bound by its invisible chains, measuring our lives in candles on cakes, wrinkles on faces, numbers on tombstones, chasing the future like a mirage in the distance, always just out of reach, until one day we realize, too late, always too late, that the future was never real, only a phantom, a shadow cast by the ever-fleeting present, slipping through our fingers even as we grasp for more, always more, never enough, until time itself grows tired of us, and we, like all who came before, are left behind, our footprints washed away by the tide of eternity, lost to the infinite, the endless, the unknowable. Time, the great deceiver, the relentless tide that pulls us forward whether we will it or not, the whisper in the wind that tells us we are running late, always late, chasing after something that can never be caught, because the moment you reach for it, it's already gone, evaporated into the past, the ever-expanding graveyard of things we thought we'd have more time for. But no, time is cruel, time is indifferent. Time moves to a rhythm we can never quite dance to, stumbling over seconds, tripping over minutes, watching years disappear like smoke rising into a starless sky. And yet we build our lives around it, carve our days into segments, measure our worth by what we can accomplish within its invisible boundaries. But what if time is not what we think? What if the past is not behind us, the future not ahead? What if every moment is stacked like pages of a book we can never finish reading, flipping between scenes, never knowing where one begins and another ends? Because what is a beginning but an arbitrary point on an infinite line? And what is an end but an illusion created by the fear that there might not be one at all? That time is not a river, but an ocean, vast and endless, stretching in all directions at once. And we, poor wanderers, are merely floating, adrift, convinced we are moving forward because that is the only way we can make sense of the chaos. But even forward is an illusion. For isn't it strange how memories linger? How a scent, a song, a single word can rip us from the present and hurl us into the past, as if time were folding in on itself, revealing its true nature as something more fluid, more slippery, something we cannot tame no matter how many clocks we build, no matter how many schedules we keep, no matter how desperately we try to hold on to the now. But the now is already gone. And in the end, all we have is the fading echo of a world that never stays the same, that shifts and shifts and shifts, until we too are gone, lost in the turning gears of something we never truly understood. Time comes in like fog through a cracked window, quiet at first, polite, almost sweet, and then it's everywhere, damp in the corners, clinging to your sleeves, filling your mouth with the taste of clocks and old batteries. And you try to speak around it, but the words arrive late, because words are always late. Even the word now is already a little antique by the time it leaves your tongue. And isn't that strange? How the present is a door that only exists while it's shutting. How the instant you touch it, it becomes a memory with fingerprints. And memory is time wearing a mask. Memory is time pretending to sit still, like a cat in sunlight. But it's not sitting still at all. It's shifting, it's breathing, it's changing the story while you're still telling it. And you think you remember a day as blue, but maybe it was gray. Maybe it was neither. Maybe it was a color that doesn't exist anymore, because your eyes have traveled since then. Your mind has traveled. Your skin has shed its old calendar, and the old you is a stranger with your face, waving from the far end of a hallway that keeps getting longer. And the hallway has numbers on the walls. Years, months, Thursdays, the specific Tuesday you forgot to call back. And you walk it anyway, barefoot, listening to the soft metronome of your own blood. Thump, 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 thump. A private clock with no hands, only insistence, only forwardness, only the gentle push that says, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Even when you don't know what going means. Even when the destination is just another version of the same room with a different light bulb. And sometimes time is syrup. Sometimes it's lightning. Sometimes it's a long ribbon being pulled through the eye of a needle. And you are the needle. And you are also the ribbon. And you are also the fingers pulling. And you are also the small knot that forms when you hesitate. When you stop to wonder if you've been here before, if this conversation already happened in a different layer of the world. If your life is a song stuck on a gentle loop, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, and the bridge is always coming, but never arrives. Because bridges are made of future, and future is made of imagination. And imagination is time's favorite perfume. It wears it everywhere. It leaves it on your pillow. It stains your dreams with what if, with soon, with one day. And one day is a jar with no lid. It leaks into everything. It leaks into your coffee, into the way you look at a clock and feel accused, into the way the sun goes down like it's tired of holding up the sky, into the way you promise yourself you'll start tomorrow, and tomorrow is an animal that keeps stepping back into the shadows. But there's also the other kind of time, the time that doesn't march, the time that pools, the time in a quiet room when you're half asleep and the air is thick, and you can hear the house breathe, and suddenly you're not sure if you're in the present or visiting a past you never lived, a future you won't remember. Because time has these hidden rooms, secret staircases behind ordinary minutes. And if you lean the right way, if you listen at the right angle, you can feel it. All the versions of you stacked like transparencies, like sheets of acetate. One smiling, one crying, one bored, one brave, one holding a door open for someone who hasn't arrived yet. And you wonder if you're the original or just the current print, the latest rendering, the most recent export of a file that's been saved and resaved so many times the edges start to blur.
And then a song comes on. Just a chord, a single suspended note. And you're 14 again for a second, and then you're 40 again for a second, and then you're both at once. And the body doesn't know how to file that. The body keeps a different kind of time. The body keeps seasons in the joints. It keeps childhood in the smell of rain. It keeps heartbreak in the chest like a pocket watch that stopped at the worst moment and refuses to start again. And you carry it. You carry all these stopped clocks, these broken sundials, these invisible hourglasses. And still the day moves on as if nothing happened. As if your internal museum of minutes isn't packed wall to wall with echoes. Time says, here is morning. Time says, here is evening. Time says, here is the same mistake again in a slightly different costume. Time says, look, a wrinkle, a laugh line, a scar shaped like a lesson. Time says, you're doing great. Time says, you're behind. Time says, none of it matters. Time says, all of it matters. And you try to argue with it, but time doesn't debate. Time just arrives. Time just becomes. Time just keeps turning the page, even if you're still reading the last paragraph. And maybe that's the whole trick. Maybe the only way to live inside time is to stop trying to outrun it, to stop trying to trap it in a schedule like a firefly in a jar. Because it dims when you do that. It loses its glow. It becomes pure measurement, pure math, pure anxiety. And time was never meant to be only math. It's also weather. It's also mood. It's also the long, slow inhale before you say something honest. It's also the silence after someone says your name in a way that changes it. So you sit with it. You let time be a river and an ocean and a hallway and a song. You let it be a clock and a dream. You let it be a loop that doesn't need a conclusion. You let the minutes drift like dust in a sunbeam. You let the past hum softly, not as a prison, not as a chain, but as a chorus. You let the future be a distant synth pad, swelling, not demanding, just there. And you return, again and again, to the only place time can't fully steal from you. The breath, the breath, the breath. This small, steady metronome that doesn't care what day it is, that doesn't care how old you are, that only knows the rhythm of being here, being here, being here, even as here keeps changing its address. Time doesn't end, it just drifts sideways, like smoke learning a new language, and you follow it without moving.
Because following doesn't always mean walking. Sometimes it means listening. Sometimes it means letting the clock melt off the wall and puddle around your feet, warm and useless and strangely comforting. Because when time stops pretending to be strict, when it stops wearing numbers and deadlines like a uniform, it becomes something softer, something almost kind, a low hum under the floorboards of existence, a frequency you don't hear with your ears, but with the quiet parts of your chest, the parts that only wake up at night when the world finally stops asking you for things. There's a version of time that lives in repetition, the kettle boiling again, the same road home, the same chord resolving just a little differently each time. It's not boring, not really. It's ritual. It's time circling itself like it's checking in. Like it's asking, are you still here? Are you still paying attention? And sometimes you are, and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you blink and a decade slips through. Sometimes you stare at a ceiling fan and an entire afternoon refuses to move. And both are real. Both are true. Because time isn't consistent. It's emotional. It listens to how you feel and then exaggerates it. Like a mischievous collaborator who keeps turning the reverb up when you're already drowning. And then there's the dangerous time. The seductive time. The kind that whispers later in your ear like a promise it has no intention of keeping. Later, it says. Later is big. Later has room. Later is infinite. And you believe it because you want to. Because the present is messy and demanding and full of unfinished sentences. But later is a clean notebook. Later is a wide open sky. Later is a track you'll finish, a call you'll make, a version of yourself that finally gets it right. Except later keeps shrinking when you're not looking. Later keeps folding itself into now, and now keeps slipping into then. And suddenly you're standing in the middle of your life wondering when it sped up, wondering who touched the fast forward button, wondering why nobody warned you that the middle doesn't feel like the middle. It just feels like Tuesday. Time also has a sense of humor, dark and subtle. It lets you rehearse conversations that never happen, and steals the words when they finally matter. It gives you answers years after the questions have expired. It teaches lessons by erasing the evidence. It lets you become wise only after the moment for wisdom has passed. And maybe that's not cruelty. Maybe that's design. Maybe time isn't trying to help or hurt. Maybe it's just showing you how little control you ever had, and how much freedom lives inside that realization. Because once you stop trying to master time, you can start collaborating with it, improvising with it, letting it stretch and sway like a slow piece of ambient music that doesn't need a hook, doesn't need a chorus, doesn't need an ending. Just texture, just drift, just presence. There are moments, rare, quiet, almost invisible, when time forgets to assert itself. When you're deep inside a sound, or a memory, or a shared silence, and the clock dissolves, and the past stops tugging, and the future stops leaning forward, and everything flattens into a single sustained note. Those moments don't last, of course. They never do. Time always comes back, clears its throat, taps its watch, but it leaves a residue, a warmth, a reminder that outside the grid, outside the schedule, there is a different tempo available. One you can return to if you remember how to listen.
And maybe that's all time really wants.
Not to be beaten, not to be escaped, but to be felt.
To be noticed in the way light changes across a room, in the way a voice ages without asking permission, in the way a day ends, whether you're ready or not. And somehow, that's okay. The hours don't need your approval. The years don't need your understanding. They'll pass either way. The only question is whether you pass with them consciously, breathing inside the motion, or whether you let them carry you like luggage, sealed and silent. So you float. You count nothing. You let the seconds blur. You let the mind wander in slow circles. You let time talk to itself through you. And it does. It rambles. It repeats. It contradicts itself. It loops back and starts again. Because time, like thought, like music, like being, was never meant to conclude. It was only meant to continue. Time loosens its tie when you stop staring at it, slouches a little, sits down beside you instead of standing over you. And in that posture, it becomes almost conversational, almost vulnerable, like it might confess something if you don't interrupt. It speaks in pauses more than words, in the space between breaths, in the way a room feels after someone leaves but before you move, in the way night doesn't arrive all at once, but seeps in, slowly, politely, dimming the edges of things until outlines soften and certainty gives up. This is where time does its best work, at the edges, in the blur, in the places where you stop insisting on clarity. There's a rhythm underneath everything, a slow oscillation, like a tide you don't see but always feel, pulling thoughts in and out, bringing old ones back with new shells stuck to them. You think you're remembering something for the last time, but time doesn't believe in last times. It believes in revisits, in remixes, in subtle variations. It brings the same idea back decades later, dressed differently, asking again, what about now? Do you understand now? And sometimes you do, and sometimes you just nod and let it pass, because understanding isn't always the point. Sometimes presence is enough. Sometimes staying with the sound is enough. Time loves patterns. It builds them everywhere. Day into night into day. Sleep into waking into sleep. Tension into release into tension. It repeats until you recognize yourself inside the repetition. Until you realize you're not trapped in the loop. You are the loop. And that's not a prison. It's a structure. It's a framework. It's how anything persists. Even change repeats. Even chaos has habits. Even drift has direction if you zoom out far enough. And zooming out, that's another trick time plays. It lets you see your life close up, moment by moment, grainy, noisy, overwhelming. And then sometimes, without warning, it pulls the camera way back, and suddenly, decades feel like a paragraph. Years feel like a sentence. Childhood feels like a single sustained chord that never really resolved, just faded under the next section. You look at it all at once and think, oh, that's the shape of it. That's the arc. And then the camera snaps back in and you're late for something again. Heart racing, pockets empty, wondering how both perspectives can be true at the same time. Time keeps souvenirs, not objects, sensations. The way a particular afternoon smelled, the exact temperature of a certain goodbye, the weight of a hand resting on your shoulder longer than expected. These details are stored without your consent, archived deep, and then released randomly, triggered by nothing important.
a chord progression, a color on a wall, a phrase overheard in passing. Suddenly you're flooded, not with memory, but with presence from another era, as if time briefly forgot its own rules and let two moments overlap. These overlaps are glitches in the system. They're gifts. They remind you that linearity is more suggestion than law.
Sometimes time feels heavy because you're carrying too much of it at once. Regrets stacked on expectations. Nostalgia leaning on anxiety. The weight of imagined futures pressing down on unfinished pasts. But time isn't asking you to carry it all simultaneously. That's something the mind invented. Time itself moves lighter than that. It passes through you cleanly if you let it. It only tangles when you try to hoard it, when you try to own it, when you try to stretch a moment past its willingness to stay. There is a gentler agreement you can make with it, a quiet one. You say, I won't rush you if you don't scare me. I won't measure you if you don't threaten me. And time, surprisingly, listens. It slows its language. It softens its edges. It becomes less about loss and more about flow. Less about running out and more about passing through. It reminds you that you are not behind. You are inside. Inside the only pace that ever existed for you. And so the hours breathe, the minutes blur, the seconds stop announcing themselves. Thought becomes texture. Awareness becomes wide and forgiving. Time stops being something that happens to you and becomes something that moves with you, through you, like sound through air, like light through water, bending, refracting, never stopping, never needing to. It keeps going, and so do you. Time doesn't ask permission, but it does respond to attention. When you stop trying to pin it down and instead let it pass through like a long, sustained tone, it starts to reveal its subtler harmonics, the ones that only show up when nothing else is fighting for the foreground. These are the frequencies that live underneath productivity, underneath urgency, underneath the false drama of before and after. They hum quietly, patiently, waiting for you to slow your inner tempo enough to hear them. There is a softness to time when it isn't being watched. The second hand only performs when it knows you're looking. Otherwise, time prefers to smear, to blur, to lose its edges. It stretches out in quiet rooms, in long drives where the road unspools like tape from an invisible reel. In late nights when the clock stops being an authority and becomes just another object in the dark. In those moments, time forgets to be linear and starts behaving more like weather, moving in fronts and systems, drifting in, drifting out, unpredictable but familiar. You can feel time most clearly in transitions. The moment just before sleep, when thoughts dissolve into shapes instead of sentences. The moment just after waking, when the world hasn't fully assembled yet, and you're not sure which version of yourself you're supposed to be today. Time is thin there, almost translucent. You could tear it if you move too fast. That's why those moments feel sacred, even if you don't have a word for why. They're cracks in the structure. They're places where the scaffolding shows. Time also lives in sound decay. In the way a note doesn't stop, it fades. In the tail of reverb that carries the memory of the sound longer than the sound itself. That's how time prefers to operate. Not in hard cuts, but in dissolves.
Endings are just the long fade out of beginnings. Beginnings are just the moment you finally notice something has been happening all along. The middle, which everyone worries about so much, is just where the texture is thickest. Sometimes time feels unbearably loud, crowded with obligations, dense with consequence. Every tick a reminder, every calendar square a demand. But even then, underneath the noise, the deeper tempo remains steady. You don't have to match the frantic surface rhythm. You can align with the slower pulse beneath it, the one that doesn't care how many things you accomplished today, the one that measures life in breaths, in heartbeats, in the quiet accumulation of experience. Time has no moral opinion. It doesn't reward or punish. It doesn't keep score. It simply moves, carrying everything equally. Joy, grief, boredom, wonder. What changes is not time itself, but your relationship to it. When you're resisting, it feels like pressure. When you're grieving, it feels like theft. When you're present, it feels like space. Same substance, different posture. There's a strange comfort in realizing that time will outlast your mistakes. That it will keep flowing long after your worst moments have dissolved into abstraction. That the sharp edges eventually wear smooth, not because they're forgiven, but because time keeps passing over them, like water over stone. Even pain becomes texture. Even loss becomes part of the ambient field. And still, nothing needs to resolve. Time doesn't require closure. It's perfectly content with continuation, with unfinished thoughts, with open loops, with ideas that circle back on themselves and never land. That's not failure. That's fidelity to the way things actually move. So you let it continue. You let the thoughts drift. You let the rhythm stay slow. You don't ask where it's going. You don't ask how long it will last. You simply remain inside it, listening, breathing, letting the long tone of existence sustain itself, moment after moment after moment, without ever needing to arrive. Time begins to feel less like a thing and more like a condition, like gravity or depth, something you don't notice until you shift your weight and suddenly feel the pull. It's there when nothing happens, especially when nothing happens, in the empty stretches, in the pauses between decisions, in the quiet hours that don't produce memories flashy enough to keep, yet somehow form the bulk of a life. Time is mostly made of those unnoticed minutes, the ones that slide past without announcement, doing their quiet work of accumulation. There's a generosity to that, if you let it be. Not every moment needs to matter loudly. Not every second needs to justify itself. Time is patient with the unremarkable. It doesn't demand highlights. It allows for long stretches of sameness, gentle repetition. Days that feel identical but aren't, because you aren't identical anymore, even if the scenery hasn't changed. Something inside you has shifted a millimeter, and time counts millimeters just as faithfully as it counts years. Sometimes time feels like it's folding you inward, like it's compressing experience instead of expanding it.
Days feel shorter, not because they are, but because your mind has learned the shortcuts. It recognizes patterns, skips ahead, fills in gaps automatically. Novelty slows time down. Familiarity speeds it up. That's one of time's quieter tricks. It rewards attention with duration. The more present you are, the more spacious things feel. The less present you are, the faster everything goes. Same hours, different density. Time also teaches by subtraction. It removes people, removes places, removes versions of yourself you thought were permanent. It doesn't ask which ones you're attached to. It just clears space. And in that clearing, something else eventually grows, though not always what you expected, and not always on your schedule. Time plants seeds you don't remember planting. Then one day, something blooms, and you think, where did this come from? And time says nothing, because it never takes credit. There's a moment, quiet, unsettling, when you realize that time has been shaping you without your supervision, that it's been sanding edges, deepening grooves, altering your voice, your posture, your patience. You didn't authorize all of it. You didn't even notice most of it. But here you are, unmistakably changed. Not better or worse, just later, more layered, more echoes, more rooms inside. Time doesn't rush grief, but it does walk with it, side by side. Grief changes speed. Sometimes it sprints, sometimes it stalls. Time adjusts. It stretches when you need space. It compresses when you need relief. It doesn't heal by erasing, despite what people say. It heals by surrounding, by giving pain more context, more neighbors, more air. Eventually, the pain isn't gone. It's just no longer alone. And then there are those moments when time feels almost holy. When you're so deeply inside an experience that the idea of duration disappears completely. No past, no future. Just an unbroken field of now. Those moments are rare not because they're hard to reach, but because they're easy to miss. They don't announce themselves. They don't glow. They're often quiet, ordinary, disguised as nothing special. That's the paradox. The most timeless moments often look like nothing at all. Time doesn't want to be solved. It doesn't want to be optimized. It doesn't want to be conquered. It wants to be accompanied, walked with, allowed. When you stop demanding that it behave, it becomes less hostile, less sharp, more like a current you can float in rather than a race you're losing. So it keeps unfolding, thought by thought, breath by breath, without climax, without conclusion, just a long, continuous unfolding, like sound fading into sound, like light turning into shadow without ever fully disappearing. Time doesn't end. It just keeps going. Time settles into a deeper register now, almost subsonic. The kind you don't hear so much as feel. a slow vibration under everything, under language, under thought, under the idea that anything needs to happen at all. It's the time that existed before clocks, before stories, before anyone thought to ask what time it was, because there was nowhere else to be. This time isn't concerned with progress. It isn't impressed by milestones. It moves like sediment, like pressure, like the long patience of mountains becoming sand without ever noticing the transition. You start to notice how often time disguises itself as expectation. How much of the future is just a thought rehearsed too many times. How often the past is a story you keep retelling because it gives shape to the present. Time doesn't mind these disguises. It wears whatever you give it. Anxiety, hope, nostalgia, anticipation. It slips into them easily, like water into any container, taking the shape without changing its nature. What changes is how heavy it feels in your hands. There is a kindness hidden in the fact that time is unstoppable. If it could be paused, we'd trap ourselves. We'd stay where it feels safe, where it feels familiar, where the light is flattering and the music hasn't shifted yet. But time insists on motion, gentle, relentless motion. It nudges you forward even when you resist, even when you cling, even when you say, not yet. And later, always later, you realize that movement saved you from becoming a statue of your own fear. Time has a way of dissolving urgency once you step back far enough. What felt catastrophic softens. What felt permanent reveals seams. Even joy, intense and bright, learns to diffuse. Not because it failed, but because it was never meant to stay concentrated. Time spreads things out. It equalizes. It gives everything room to breathe, including you. You can feel time most clearly in aging, not as decay, but as depth, as accumulation, as resonance. Like a room that's heard music for decades and now hums faintly, even in silence. You carry your years like that. Layers of sound absorbed into the walls of your being. That's why certain moments echo louder than they should. That's why silence is never empty. Time has been there first, leaving traces. There's a moment, soft, almost imperceptible, when you stop asking how much time you have and start asking how it feels to be inside it. That shift changes everything. The future stops being a countdown. The past stops being a verdict. The present stops being something you're failing to maximize. It becomes a place, a texture, a temperature. Somewhere you can actually rest. Time doesn't demand your attention all the time. It doesn't need to be acknowledged constantly. It's content to run in the background, like a long ambient track with no melody, just atmosphere. You can tune into it or not. Either way, it keeps playing. And sometimes, without trying, you sink to it. Your breathing aligns, your thoughts slow. The noise drops away. And for a moment, just a moment, you're not managing time or being managed by it.
You're simply moving together. Nothing resolves. Nothing needs to. This isn't a story with an ending. It's a field. It's a current. It's a continuous, soft unfolding that doesn't care whether you understand it. Understanding was never the requirement. Presence was. So the sound continues. The drift continues. The moment stretches without strain. Time keeps going, and you remain gently inside it. Time thins out again, like breath on cold glass, almost invisible, but still there, still proof of something moving. It drapes itself over ordinary moments, the way light leans against a wall, the way a sound arrives late in an empty room, the way you pause before doing nothing in particular. This is time at its most honest, when it's not being asked to mean anything, when it's allowed to exist without performance. It doesn't rush here. It doesn't announce itself. It just holds. There's a subtle shift when you realize time isn't chasing you. That urgency you feel, that constant sense of being behind, that's not time, that's narrative. That's a story learned early and repeated often. Time itself is neutral. It doesn't hurry. It doesn't shame. It simply moves, wide and patient, like a long road that doesn't care how fast you walk, because it knows you'll get there eventually. Wherever there turns out to be, you start to sense how many versions of now exist simultaneously. The now of the body, counting heartbeats. The now of the mind, leaping ahead and looping back. The now of the world, spinning without noticing you at all. These nows overlap imperfectly, like transparent slides slightly misaligned. Most of the tension in living comes from trying to force them to match. Time relaxes when you stop doing that, when you let the mismatch exist, when you accept that being human means always being a little out of sync. Time also has a way of sanding down certainty. What once felt solid becomes flexible. What once felt obvious becomes questionable. This isn't confusion, it's refinement. Time replaces sharp conclusions with gradients. It teaches you to live inside the maybe, the not yet, the still becoming. And if that feels uncomfortable, it's only because certainty is loud and change is quiet. And quiet things take longer to hear. You may notice that time doesn't feel the same in solitude as it does in company. Alone, it stretches, becomes expansive, reflective. With others, it condenses, accelerates, braids itself between shared glances and overlapping sentences. Neither is better. They're just different densities of the same substance. Time adapts to context. It always has. There's a peculiar relief in realizing that you don't need to catch up to time. You're already inside it. You never fell out. Even when you feel lost, even when you feel stalled, time is still moving with you, not past you. It carries stagnation just as faithfully as motion. It includes confusion. It allows pause. It doesn't disqualify you for standing still. Eventually, you stop listening for the tick. You stop checking the distance. You stop asking how long this will last. You let the experience unfold at its own pace, which is the only pace it ever had. Thought softens. The edges blur again. The sense of duration dissolves into sensation. And in that space, wide, quiet, unmeasured, you understand something without words. Time was never the thing to overcome. It was the medium, the atmosphere, the water you've been swimming in since the first breath, and will continue to swim in until breathing no longer needs a clock. So it goes on, without hurry, without ending, just a long, gentle continuation. Time becomes almost transparent here, like it's stepping aside to let you notice everything else. The faint hum of existence, the soft persistence of being. It feels less like motion and more like allowance. Nothing is pushed, nothing is pulled. Things simply occur, one after another, not in a rush, not in a queue, just in a kind of patient unfolding that doesn't need an audience. You begin to sense how much of time is actually space. Space for thought to wander without direction. Space for emotion to rise and fall without needing explanation. Space for moments that don't contribute to a narrative arc, but still belong. Still count in a way that isn't numerical. Time holds that space open. It doesn't judge how you use it. It doesn't even notice. It just keeps the room available. There's a quiet humility in time's indifference. It doesn't single you out. It doesn't center your story above any other. It treats everything equally. The monumental and the mundane, the remembered and the forgotten. A leaf falling and a life changing both pass through it with the same ease. This isn't coldness, it's fairness. It's a reminder that meaning isn't assigned by duration or scale, but by presence. You might notice that time rarely feels heavy when you're fully engaged. Not busy, not distracted, but engaged. When your attention is resting gently on whatever is in front of you. In those moments, time doesn't compress or expand. It disappears. Not because it's gone, but because it no longer needs to announce itself. Like a frame around a picture you're finally looking at. Time is generous with second chances, though it never labels them as such. It simply offers more moments, more contexts, more variations. You may miss one opening, but another arrives, wearing different clothes, asking a slightly different question. Time doesn't repeat exactly. It echoes. And echoes change shape as they travel. As you stay here, listening, the internal clock grows quieter. The constant commentary about progress, age, speed, and scarcity fades into background static. What remains is rhythm. Not measured rhythm, not metered rhythm, but organic rhythm. The rise and fall of attention, the natural arc of energy, the pulse that knows when to rest and when to move without consulting a schedule. Time doesn't mind silence. It doesn't fill it unless you ask. Silence is one of its favorite textures. In silence, time stretches without tension. It becomes almost tactile, like a soft fabric you can wrap around yourself. Nothing demands response here. Nothing is waiting. And so the moment lingers, not because it's holding on, but because you're no longer pushing it away. You're not trying to use it. You're not trying to save it. You're simply letting it be what it already is. This is the place where time and awareness overlap so completely they're indistinguishable. Where the idea of how long loses relevance. Where continuation is enough. It goes on. It keeps breathing. And you stay with it. Time settles into a kind of still motion now. Like a slow current beneath ice. Moving. Always moving. But so quietly, you could mistake it for rest. This is where effort falls away. Where the mind stops reaching for footholds and just floats. The sense of sequence softens. Before and after blur into a continuous field. And what remains is a gentle awareness of change happening without urgency. You notice that time doesn't need events to justify itself. It's perfectly content during lulls. It thrives in waiting rooms, in empty afternoons, in the long exhale after something important has passed. These spaces are not gaps. They are the bulk of experience. Time spends most of its life here, uncelebrated, doing the quiet work of integration. There's a tenderness in how time carries unfinished things. It doesn't rush them to conclusion. It lets questions remain open. It lets stories trail off. It allows you to be mid-sentence for years if that's what's required. Completion is optional. Continuation is not. As you stay with it, you begin to feel less separate from time and more composed of it. Your thoughts rise and fall like tides. Your moods move like weather systems. Even your sense of self feels less fixed, more like a pattern passing through. Time isn't happening to you. You're happening inside time. Time has no preference for clarity. It doesn't mind ambiguity. In fact, it seems to favor it. Certainty tends to collapse under duration. Ambiguity survives. It adapts. It allows for growth without demanding resolution. Time understands that most truths are not statements, but processes. There's a deep relief in no longer asking what comes next. Not because nothing comes next, but because next will arrive whether or not it's anticipated. Time handles that part. Your only task is to remain available. Time, that elusive wisp slipping between the cracks of consciousness, stretching and compressing like some cosmic accordion, never quite graspable, yet always present, ticking, sometimes too fast, like sand through frantic fingers, sometimes too slow, an unbearable molasses dragging the moments into eternity. But what is eternity anyway, if not a construct of perception, a shadow of time itself curling back on itself like a serpent devouring its own tail? The Ouroboros, the infinite loop, the paradox of being and becoming. For in every passing second, we are both who we were and who we are yet to be. But does time even move in one direction? Or are we merely passengers on a ride we call linearity, because our minds can't comprehend the simultaneity of all things? The now, the then, the never, the forever, entangled like quantum threads in some universal loom, where past and future are but illusions dancing in the wake of consciousness. And yet, we build our lives around this illusion, setting clocks, counting days, marking anniversaries, mourning the past and fearing the future, all while the present moment evaporates like mist in the morning sun, leaving behind only memories, those echoes of what once was.